Love is not just a feeling, it's a psychological mirror. And what you see in it might shock you. We like to believe love is pure, destined, and effortless. But what if the truth is far darker? What if the person you're obsessed with isn't really them at all, but a reflection of everything you've ignored within yourself? Carl Jung, the legendary psychologist, revealed that love is not just romance. It's an unconscious battleground of hidden desires, fears, and illusions. And until you face this harsh truth, you may never experience real love at all. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, saw love differently than most. While society sells us fairy tales of soulmates and happily ever afters, Jung exposed love as something far more complex and often painful. He believed that what we call love is frequently an illusion, shaped by our unconscious projections, unmet needs, and even the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Modern love is filled with fantasies. We idealize partners, chase the thrill of infatuation, and demand perfection, only to wake up disillusioned. But Jung's teachings force us to ask, are we ever truly loving another person, or just the fantasy we've attached to them? Carl Jung's most unsettling revelation about love is this: we don't fall in love with people, we fall in love with what they reflect back at us. Beneath the surface of every attraction, every obsession, even every heartbreak, lies the shadow self, the hidden, often rejected parts of our own psyche that we unconsciously project onto others. When you meet someone who triggers an instant, magnetic pull, it's rarely about them. It's about the disowned aspects of yourself they seem to carry. The charming rebel you idolize may embody the freedom you've suppressed in yourself. The nurturing partner you cling to might reflect your own unmet need for care. But here's the trap. If you don't recognize these projections, you're not loving a real person, you're loving a mirror. This explains why so many toxic relationships feel intoxicating at first. The intensity isn't a sign of destiny, it's a red flag. For example, someone who grew up with a critical parent might be drawn to partners who are emotionally distant, replaying the same dynamic in an attempt to fix the past. Another person, ashamed of their own anger, might fall for a volatile partner, living out the rage they deny in themselves. These aren't bonds of love, they're unconscious attempts to complete ourselves through another person. And when the illusion cracks, when the partner fails to play their assigned role, the relationship crumbles. That's why Jung insisted that perfect love is a myth. Real love isn't about finding someone who fits your fantasy, it's about integrating the parts of yourself you've shoved into the dark. The more you refuse to face your shadow, the more it controls your relationships. You'll chase those who embody what you lack, punish those who expose your vulnerabilities, and blame fate when things fall apart. But the truth is far more liberating. Love isn't about completion. It's about wholeness. The healthiest relationships don't thrive because two people are perfect for each other. They thrive because both have done the brutal work of owning their shadows, so they can finally see and love another person as they truly are. Jung's theory of the anima, the unconscious feminine in men, and animus, the unconscious masculine in women, reveals one of love's most deceptive illusions. We are irresistibly drawn to those who embody the inner qualities we've failed to develop in ourselves. For men, the anima represents the suppressed emotional depth, intuition, and vulnerability they've been conditioned to reject. For women, the animus often manifests as unexpressed assertiveness, logic, or ambition, traits society may have discouraged them from owning. But instead of cultivating these qualities within, we project them outward, searching for completion in another person. That's why a man who disowns his sensitivity might become obsessed with an emotionally expressive woman, not because he truly loves her, but because she carries the soulful depth he's buried. A woman who fears her own power might idealize a domineering partner, mistaking control for strength. This unconscious search fuels one of love's greatest dangers: obsession. When we believe someone else holds the missing pieces of our psyche, we don't love them, we worship them. The soulmate myth becomes a prison where dependency masquerades as devotion. Think of the lover who abandons their own creativity to serve a partner's artistic dreams, or the person who tolerates cruelty because they believe no one else could understand them. These aren't bonds of love, they're acts of self-betrayal, rooted in the delusion that wholeness can be found in another. Jung warned that until we reclaim these projected qualities, we'll remain trapped in cycles of idealization and disappointment, forever chasing a salvation that can only come from within. The practical takeaway is both simple and radical. True love starts with wholeness within. It demands that we do the uncomfortable work of integrating our anima or animus, not through a partner, but through ourselves. A man who nurtures his own emotional intelligence no longer demands that his partner carry the weight of his unspoken needs. A woman who embraces her strength won't confuse control with love. This doesn't mean relationships lose their magic. It means the magic stops being a delusion. When two people meet not as halves seeking completion, but as souls who've dared to become whole alone, that's when love transforms from a desperate hunger into a conscious choice, one that honors both the light and the shadow in each other. At the heart of Jung's psychology lies a challenging truth. Real love requires individuation, the often painful process of becoming your authentic self, even when it threatens the relationships you hold dear. This isn't about selfishness, it's about the unavoidable tension between growth and attachment. Love, in its deepest form, doesn't exist to make us comfortable, it exists to make us whole, and wholeness demands confronting the parts of ourselves we've abandoned to keep others happy. The fear of losing someone can feel like an existential threat, but Jung would argue that losing yourself in order to keep them is the far greater tragedy. This is why love so often hurts, not because it's flawed, but because it calls forth our unlived lives. It dredges up childhood wounds we've ignored, exposes the ego's desperate need for validation, and forces us to choose between safety and truth. Consider a woman who realizes her marriage has become a cage, not because her partner is cruel, but because she's spent years shrinking to fit his unspoken expectations. Or a man who discovers that his people-pleasing has erased his own desires, leaving him resentful and numb. These aren't failures of love, they're its crucibles. The relationship either becomes a space where both partners commit to mutual evolution, or it becomes a casualty of one person's awakening. A poignant example is a couple who starts as perfect complements. She's the free spirit, he's the stable anchor, only to fracture when she begins to cultivate her own grounding, or he explores his spontaneity. The very traits that once created balance now feel like betrayal. "You've changed" becomes an accusation, when it should be a celebration. Jung's insight here is brutal but liberating. Love is not about possession, it's about liberation. If a relationship can't survive your growth, it was never truly loving you. It was loving the role you played. The healthiest unions are those where two people consent to each other's becoming, even when it means enduring seasons of chaos, uncertainty, and even grief. Because in the end, the only love that doesn't rot is the love that lets you breathe. We live in a world that sells love as a fairy tale, a cosmic reward for those who wait, suffer, or wish hard enough. Movies teach us that love is effortless, social media flaunts curated perfection, and pop culture whispers that the right partner will silence all our fears. But Jung saw this for what it is, a collective delusion that keeps us chasing ghosts. These narratives don't just distort love, they weaponize it, turning it into a fantasy we use to escape ourselves. The truth? Real love isn't about finding someone who makes life feel like a dream. It's about waking up, together, to the messy, beautiful reality of who you both actually are. The line between real love and projected fantasy is thin but critical. Projected love is possessive, frantic, and conditional. It demands that the other person play a role in your personal myth. You might idealize them, painting over their flaws with the brush of your unmet needs. You might ignore red flags, dismissing gut instincts in favor of the story you've attached to them. Or you might suffocate them with emotional dependency, punishing them when they fail to fill the voids you refuse to face yourself. These aren't acts of love, they're acts of self-deception. Real love, by contrast, begins with disillusionment, the moment you see the other person not as a savior or a villain, but as a human, flawed and sovereign, just like you. So how do you withdraw these projections? First, get brutally honest about what you're really seeking. Are you drawn to their confidence because you feel small? Their creativity because you've neglected your own? Second, practice seeing them without the filter of your longing. When you notice yourself making excuses for their behavior or scripting their potential in your head, pause. Ask, am I loving this person or the idea of them? Finally, turn the mirror inward. Every trait you adore or resent in them is a clue to something unclaimed in yourself. The goal isn't to stop loving, it's to start loving clearly, without the weight of your unmet needs distorting the view. Because the most profound intimacy isn't born from fantasy. It's born from two people standing in the unflinching light of reality, choosing each other not as answers, but as questions worth exploring together. Jung's concept of the sacred marriage, konjunktio, reveals love's highest purpose, not the union of two individuals, but the inner reconciliation of opposites within ourselves that must precede any authentic connection with another. This alchemical process transforms love from a desperate search for completion into a conscious journey of mutual awakening. Before we can truly meet another person, we must first integrate our own contradictions, the masculine and feminine, strength and vulnerability, shadow and light, that we've spent years projecting outward. The soulmate we seek isn't hiding in another, they're waiting to be discovered within. Conscious love demands three radical commitments: self-awareness, boundaries, and the acceptance of imperfection. Self-awareness means catching yourself when you slip into projection and having the courage to ask, is this my need or theirs? Boundaries require honoring your wholeness even when love tempts you to abandon it, saying no to relationships that demand self-betrayal. And acceptance means releasing the fantasy of perfection, not as resignation, but as devotion to what's real. The partner who irritates you with their messiness might be mirroring your own repressed chaos. The one whose flaws repel you could be pointing to the parts of yourself you still refuse to love. Here's the paradox few want to hear. Conflict isn't love's failure, it's its forge. The friction between two people's unhealed wounds, differing values, or clashing shadows isn't a sign of incompatibility, but an invitation to grow. A relationship without conflict is often a graveyard of suppressed truths, where both partners choose comfort over evolution. The healthiest unions aren't those free of storms, but those where both people agree to weather them awake, not as adversaries, but as allies in each other's becoming. Which brings us to the final liberating truth. The most loving thing you can do is to stop using others to complete yourself. Real love begins when you take back your projections, when you stop demanding that another person be your healer, your purpose, or your missing half. Only then can you meet them as they are, not a symbol, not a savior, but a fellow traveler on the perilous, glorious path of becoming human. This is the alchemy of love, the moment two whole people choose each other not out of lack, but from overflow, not to escape themselves, but to celebrate what they've dared to reclaim. Love, as Carl Jung reveals, is far more than a feeling. It's a mirror, a teacher, and at times, a merciless revealer of truths we'd rather avoid. We've explored how our attractions are often unconscious projections of our unlived selves, how the shadow and anima/animus silently dictate our romantic choices, and why real love demands the courage to individuate, even when it shakes the foundations of our relationships. We've confronted the uncomfortable reality that much of what we call love is actually fantasy, and that true connection begins only when we withdraw our projections and see each other clearly. Now, here's your challenge. Pause and reflect. Are you loving a person or an illusion? Are you seeking completion in another, or have you begun the difficult work of wholeness within yourself? This isn't about judging your past or current relationships, but about awakening to the patterns that may be holding you back from the depth of love you truly crave. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you experienced Jung's harsh truths in your own life? Have you ever mistaken a projection for love, or faced the painful but liberating choice between growth and a relationship that no longer served your becoming? Share your stories in the comments. This is where we learn from each other's journeys. If you want to dive deeper into these ideas, I highly recommend Jung's The Psychology of the Unconscious and Modern Man in Search of a Soul. These texts unpack the complexities of the psyche and love with unparalleled insight.